Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Cyber Showcase. I'm your host, Brett Rock. As always, want to thank you for taking some time today to join us for a quick webinar. I know your time's valuable, so we appreciate you spending some of it with us. Today's focus is going to be on the other risk assessments. And while you can't see me right now, I am doing other in quotation or in air quotes. A lot of this will be about risk assessments that maybe you're not quite as familiar with or didn't know that SBS could help you with. But there are a variety of them that we do assist with, and we'll walk through some of those today. Just to kind of do a little housekeeping up front, if you have any questions, we are going to be going through a bunch of different things today, but if you have questions as we're doing that, please feel free to use the GoToMeeting box that has been provided. I'll be happy to answer those at the end of the webinar today. And then I always forget to do this, so I'm going to go ahead and get it right up front. If you have a moment at the end today, we do have a quick survey we'd love for you to take. Helps us understand what you guys might want to learn more about, how we're doing, and things like that. So we appreciate you taking a few minutes on that if you can. All right, so from an agenda perspective, let me back up. From a goal perspective, our goal today is for you to be able to get a better sense of the other types of risk assessments that are out there, why you might be doing them or need to be doing them, what they are, what they're meant to risk assess, and then how we might be able to help you with that as well. We're going to be digging kind of in and out of TRAC. For those of you who are familiar with that tool, it's our proprietary automated tool that helps with different pieces of the information security program. And we're going to be walking through some of that. I'm going to try to make sure you don't get as too seasick, but we will be bouncing back and forth from the slide deck and TRAC itself to walk you through things. The agenda, we are already working through our introductions here, which will be done shortly. We are going to talk about the other risk assessments: enterprise risk, Bank Secrecy Act, compliance, and then I'm also going to, those were the three that I mentioned in the introduction, or I guess the definition of the webinar today when we were marketing it. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about what we call our TRAC module. That's a risk assessment from commercial account perspective. And then also our ISP assessment, which is an assessment of your information security program as a whole. So there's 5 other quote unquote other types of risk assessments. We're going to look at all of those today. We're going to talk again about the kind of what they are, why you might want to do them, and then how you would do them in our TRAC tool if you're interested. We'll have some takeaways, and then we'll wrap things up today with some questions and answers. So again, thanks for joining us, and hopefully you'll get something out of today's webinar. Just one other quick thing before we dive into it. You are probably familiar with our Institute webinar series. We've got a great one coming up next week. Will Keller on our team is going to be doing assumed breach testing and why you should be testing your network as though a hacker is already in there. So if you're interested in registering for that, I encourage you to take a look at it on our website. All right, so just quickly, for those of you who are unfamiliar with SBS, or maybe you are, but you need a refresher, we have been in the industry for 19 years, something we're very excited about. And the big thing there is we're not an accounting firm that decided we could do your IT audits, or a managed service provider that said, hey, let us do your network security work. Nothing against either of those two, but this is what we eat, breathe, sleep, drink, everything. It's what we were born into. So consulting, auditing, education, and then the tools like TRAC that we're about to discuss. That's really all we do, and we do it better than anybody in the industry. We have more than 1,400 organizations using our TRAC tool in over 40 states. In fact, we have customers in over 49 states. So if anybody on the call is from Idaho or knows anybody that needs work done there, please let us know. We're endorsed across the country by a number of state banking associations for everything we do. We've got all kinds of great educational offerings. I'm sure all of you are familiar with those, including our great Hacker Hour. And then the one thing I want to point out that I think is really critically important for today's conversation is in the bottom right-hand corner there. Everybody's going to tell you they've got the best people in the industry. I'm going to tell you the same thing. But the important thing about that is all of the built-in intelligence that we're about to talk about when we get into TRAC is created by our team of experts. We believe very strongly that there's not another tool out there that's going to give you the head start when it comes to performing things like your risk assessments, your business continuity, your vendor management. TRAC is going to give you a much further head start than anybody out there without having to jump through hoops to do that. And the way we are able to help you with that is by all of the great information that we've created and developed and continue to update by our team of experts. I talk about this a lot. You're probably tired of hearing about it if you've sat through more than one of these, so I apologize. But we believe as a company in taking a proactive approach to information and cybersecurity. And what I mean by that, and really how that plays into our conversation today is, yes, you can do these risk assessments and do the bare minimum. And you can use a spreadsheet and you can check a box and kind of move on with your lives. And that's fine. Generally that will probably work for at least some period of time. But what we really believe in is using a tool like TRAC to really make it as simple as possible, certainly, but also to help drive better decision making as well. We want you to be proactive. We want you to do this stuff, not just for the sake of saying, okay, we did it, but because we understand that there's value in doing it as well. So it's not just okay, we've done that, we're not going to add any additional time or energy or resources, stick it in a desk drawer, we'll look at it again a year from now when we have to update it. But rather, how can we use the information that we're getting out of our risk assessments to really help drive better decision making going forward? That's a proactive approach, and that's really what we stress when it comes to using TRAC, and really anything else we do as a company. So why do people need help with risk assessments at all? Generally, if you're here to learn about TRAC, or you're here to learn about how risk assessments are completed and using our tool, you probably fall in one of what we consider to be 4 buckets, or maybe a mix of them. The first one is we don't have enough time. We're stretched pretty thin. Information security officers, people that have that title at a financial institution or really any type of organization, generally you're stretched pretty thin. You don't have a lot of extra time to be working on stuff. You've got multiple hats you're wearing, and you're kind of just gasping for air as much as possible and trying to get as much done as you can. So kind of the first bucket is we don't have enough time. We need to find a better way of doing this. The second bucket is not enough manpower, kind of piggybacks off that, right? We have somebody that's wearing multiple hats, and we just don't have enough people to work on the stuff that we need to get done when it comes to risk assessments. The third bucket is not enough expertise. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes it's just we don't know what we don't know. We can do a risk assessment on a spreadsheet and hope we get everything correct, but we don't know everything that's out there. We don't know all the threats. We don't know all the controls we might be considering. We don't have the algorithms and the analytics to help us digest this information. So sometimes it's just we don't have the expertise. And then finally, not enough patience. So maybe we have all the stuff. We've got the time, we've got the expertise, we've got the manpower, but God, I hate doing risk assessments, and I wish there was a better way or an easier way to do them. Again, you probably fall in one of these 4 buckets if you're here today. If not more than one, that's certainly common. And hopefully we'll show you some ways where we can address all of those as we're moving along. So what are the most common risk assessments? Now, if you're familiar with TRAC, we have kind of the 3 that most people think, or I guess 4 that most people think about. And in fact, my colleague, Nick Podorodsky, last month did an entire hacker hour on those most common and kind of most critical risk assessments. The first one being the IT risk assessment, right? So that's where we come in and we're going to risk assess assets, anything that stores, transmits, or processes data. This is probably the most common risk assessment that you're aware of. And to us, it is the most critically important. So that is a biggie. We also have vendor risk assessments, right? This is where we're looking at our vendors. We need to understand how risky they are. We need to understand, do we have controls in place? Are they meeting their risk mitigation goals so that we're comfortable with where they are, or else we need to make decisions about how we want to move forward. So we probably are already doing some type of vendor risk assessment as well. The third common one is a business process risk assessment, which is generally part of your business impact analysis. So those are 2 different things. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. Your business impact analysis is the roadmap, right? How do we get back up and running if everything fails at once? Whereas the risk assessment component of that is going to be looking at the different functions and processes that make up our business continuity management program and understanding where our strengths and weaknesses there are so that we can address those and make sure that we're basically as stable as we possibly can be. So that's the third one. And then the fourth real common one is something like the CAT, an information security program risk assessment, where we're, it's not the quantitative risk assessment that we typically would be hoping to do as part of an IT risk assessment, for example. But the CAT is more kind of questions and answers, multiple choice questions, and just getting a sense of what our maturity level is from an information and cybersecurity perspective. So chances are good you're already all doing those 4 is my guess. And if not, certainly reach out to us. We have some ways to help you with those as well. But those are the really common ones. But let's talk about some of the other risk assessments. Now, again, what we're going to do here today, and kind of the method to my madness, will be we're going to talk about them, each of them individually. I'm going to jump into TRAC. I'm going to show you how they operate here in that tool, and then we'll kind of move forward from there. So the first of the, well, let me just jump through here. Enterprise risk management, we talked about, Bank Secrecy Act compliance, corporate account risk assessments, and then your information security program, which will be similar to the CAT, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. So let's start by talking about the ERM risk assessment. When it comes to the ERM, the Enterprise Risk Management Risk Assessment, what we're risk assessing, or what we're doing there, is a risk assessment of all the functions and processes that make up your enterprise risk management program. So in a lot of ways, this is probably going to be one of the more broad risk assessments that you're actually going to be doing, because you're not just looking at one segment. You're not just looking at vendors or IT assets or business functions. We're looking at pretty much everything that makes up our enterprise risk management program at our institution or organization. Now, why would we want to do an ERM risk assessment? Because as always, we need to know where our greatest areas of weaknesses are. So if we're looking at all these different things, and I'm going to talk about some of the stuff you might want to risk assess there, but if we're looking at those, we need to know where we're not meeting our goals so that we can address those, right? We certainly want to be able to demonstrate compliance. We want to be able to show anybody that needs to see it, here's our risk assessment, but we also want to be able to understand where our strengths and weaknesses are so that we can devote our limited resources in the best way possible. So what might we risk assess when it comes to an ERM risk assessment? Things like administrative. So you talk about your accounts payable, your human resources, your payroll. Affiliate. So if you have any affiliate companies, you own an insurance company or an investment or a trust company, that would be something that you would want to risk assess as part of an enterprise one. Your back office, ACH processing, imaging, item processing, your customer service, both in person, but also any other place that you might offer customer service, you'd want to risk assess that. Finance, your accounting, your general ledger, your Fed funds management, capital, asset liability management. You'd want to look at your lending as part of an ERM risk assessment, your marketing, retail. So all kinds of, again, you can probably imagine this is much more global in nature than most of the risk assessments that you're going to perform. And frankly, it's our most global one here in TRAC, because we're looking at a lot of things that we're probably not going to look at really anywhere else. So what is the process of doing an ERM risk assessment? Pretty simple. We made it a 4-step process here in TRAC. This is generally what you should be seeing as you're doing an ERM risk assessment. You're going to start by understanding what your ERM functions are. So we just talked about a list of some of those that you might want to take a look at, but we also want to understand how critical each of them is as well. So it's one thing to make a list of them, but we do need to get a sense for how critical each of them is compared to the other functions that you're talking about. So kind of a 2-step process to get it started. What functions are we looking at from a risk assessment perspective, but also how critical is each of them as well. From there, we move to the second step, which is what are the threats that could potentially impact a function or process? So if we did have a threat, how bad would it be if it were to happen, and how likely is it to occur? So not only is it, not only do we have to cobble together a list of threats that might be out there, but we need to understand both the impact, how bad it would be, as well as the probability, how likely is it? From there, we move to controls. So how are we mitigating those threats? So once we've identified the threats to a particular function or process, we need to figure out, okay, what are we doing to mitigate those particular threats? And then we wrap everything up by running good reports that demonstrate compliance, certainly, but also ideally help drive better decision making. Now, a little bit of a spoiler alert here. The methodology, the workflow that we just followed, or the workflow that we just went through and we're about to see here in TRAC in just a moment, is going to be identical to the workflow you're going to see in the BSA and the compliance risk assessments as well. So I'm not going to cover those in quite as much detail because, again, it's kind of a feature, not a bug. We built our workflow, our methodology to say all of these risk assessments are basically identical. The difference will be what it is we're risk assessing, what threats are out there, what controls could we potentially put in place. And from there on out, it's a pretty similar process. And the goal is once you get used to it, generally you can pick up the other ones pretty easily as well. So let's go ahead and jump into TRAC itself. And you're going to see on the left-hand side of the screen, I've got our ERM module open. We're going to follow that exact same 4-step workflow we just talked about. So again, to recap, get our processes and functions in there. So we need to get a list of them, but we also have to understand how critical each of them is. We're going to identify the threats that could potentially occur to a process or function. We're going to talk about controls. We're going to run reports. 4 steps, as simple as we can possibly make it. Now, when you first get in here, as you may be aware, the screen would be blank. So the first step will be getting your functions or processes into the tool. There's 2 ways of doing that. The first way is using our quick add option. That would be adding multiple processes or functions at one time. But to kind of walk through the entire workflow, I'm going to click on our plus icon next to processes, and that's going to bring me to this screen where you see 3 columns: details, protection profile, and assignments. The details is where we'll start by picking the process type we want to include. And if you click on that drop down, you're going to see that we predefine from the jump a bunch of different processes or functions that you may have from an enterprise risk perspective. So you can scroll through the list, or you can come up here and start typing, let's just say network administration, just as an example, and I'll go ahead and give it a name. Now, and it's probably going to tell me I've already got that, but you can ignore it. All right, as soon as we pick the process type, TRAC is going to kick into high gear and start predefining data for us. That predefinition of data, just so you know, as always, is done by our team of experts. We talked about that earlier, and we're going to give you all of that. You don't have to worry about jumping through hoops. You don't have to worry about answering questionnaires. We're going to give you all of our information right up front. Now, we're going to do that starting with what we call a protection profile. Now, whether you do this in TRAC or you do this in the spreadsheet or in another tool or wherever you need to be doing it, you need to have an idea of how critical each individual process or function is. And that the way we're going to do that here is by looking at the reputational risk of the process or function, the financial risk, the legal regulatory risk, and then the strategic risk. So how would it impact us strategically or from a strategic vision perspective? TRAC will predefine all of that. We also allow you to customize it, and we give you tooltips to help there. But the important thing is we're going to use all of this to give you what we call a protection profile score for every single process or function. A high in one of these categories is worth 3 points, a medium is worth 2, a low is worth 1. So the highest it could be would be a 12 out of 12. That'd be a high for all 4. Conversely, the lowest it could be would be a low for all 4 or a 4 out of 12. But every single process or function is going to be somewhere in that range. The protection profile score is what you can use to understand how critical each individual function is. The higher that number, the greater the criticality. On the back end here in TRAC, we're going to use that to do all of the quantitative analysis so that we can give you a risk assessment with numerical values so that you can really granularly understand how risky each of these is from both an inherent and a residual risk perspective. So lots of big things. We use that protection profile for a lot of big reasons. On the right-hand side, I'm not going to discuss too much of this, but I will point out that we do allow you to link an owner to our business functions. So in TRAC, if you do want to pull other people into the risk assessment process, you can absolutely do that. So if I were to come in here and say, like, Brian is responsible for our network administration, I can pull him into the process, and he can come in here as the owner and start work on the risk assessment for this particular function, but cannot touch anything he's not assigned to. So again, if you want to pull other people into TRAC to do the work, you can absolutely do that, and we don't charge a per user fee, so you can have as many as you want. That's up to you. So the first step is getting it in here. I'm going to go ahead and save it. Well, actually, it's going to make me add a new name, so I apologize. I'm going to go ahead and save it now. And that's the first step of the process, right? We've started to get our information in here. So I'll save it, and it'll take me back to the dashboard. Now I can come in and actually search for it and perform the risk assessment itself. So I'm going to come in, and I'm going to click on the title. And that's going to take me inside that particular function or process and give me a 3-step workflow: details, threats, and controls. Details is all the information we've already included. You can make changes in TRAC if you ever need to. Threats is the next step. So again, whether you're doing it here or in any other tool or any other way, the next step in that workflow is going to be understanding what threats could potentially befall this particular process or function. In TRAC, the way we do it is narrow that scope down by saying these are the threats that could potentially impact this particular function. We're not going to make you scroll through 1,000 threats to find what it is you're looking for like other tools might. We're going to narrow that scope down for you. We also give you definitions of the threats as well as an impact and a probability score. So if you remember back on the workflow we talked about, we have to identify the threats, but we also have to understand how bad it would be if that threat were to occur and how likely is it for that threat to occur at all. So we're going to give you the impact. That's on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being devastating. How bad would it be if it were to happen? Probability is on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being most likely to occur without any controls in place whatsoever. So all of this here in the tool is predefined for you and ready for you to use. So now that we've identified the threats, we have to talk about the controls, right? Now that we understand how risky, what could potentially happen to this particular function, we need to understand how we're mitigating those things from actually happening. On the control step, it's going to be more of the same here in TRAC. We're going to customize a list of controls you could conceivably have in place. We're also going to weight them by importance. It stands to reason not every single control is as valuable as the next, so we've gone ahead and made sure you understand how critical each of these controls might be. And where your work would come into play, either, again, depending, no matter how you do this, is you have to identify the controls you've got. So we've got 2 columns, implemented and plan change. Implemented for us is straightforward. Yes or no, do you have this control in place right now for this particular process or function? So if I said, yep, we've got an incident response plan and our network administration is a part of it, I click the toggle, it goes from off to on, and now TRAC knows, yep, that control is in place for this particular process or function. So yes, we do employee security awareness training. Yes, we have an IT risk assessment. Yep, we do social engineering testing. Again, implemented is yes or no, are you doing it right now? The plan change column is a little different. For one thing, it is optional. You don't have to use it if you don't want to, but if you do use it, what you're saying is we don't have this control yet, but we will be adding it in the future. And that would allow us in our reports that we're about to look at to get not just an inherent risk score for every single function, no controls whatsoever, a residual risk score based off the implemented column, but we can also give you a future risk score as well. That would be implemented plus planned, or essentially what will our risk look like down the road if we do X, Y, and Z on top of what we're doing now. So again, implemented is yes or no, are you doing it now? Plan change is no, but we'll do it down the road. So before we get into reports, I just want to pause here and just kind of point out the workflow up to this point. We did get our functions in here. We've identified not just the function itself, but how critical each of them are using that protection profile. We've identified the threats as well that could potentially occur on that particular function, but we've also identified the impact and the probability of those threats occurring. All of that in TRAC predefined for you. And then we've also talked about the controls, which ones we have in place and potentially which ones we'll add down the road. That is the process of doing a risk assessment. From there, it's just a matter of running reports. So in TRAC, if we were to go to our reports tab, we do allow you to pull reports based off of individual assets, groups of them, all of them, by tag or label or filter. We've got PDF and Excel reports. You can run it in either format. And then we have packets you can use as well. But if I go ahead and I've pulled up a report packet for us to take a look at already, if I scroll down, the first report that we give you that I always talk about is our process protection profile report, which is a bit of a mouthful, but what we're doing here is looking at each individual process, looking at the reputational, financial, legal, regulatory, and strategic risk, so that we can give you that protection profile score, which again tells us how critical each of these is from a risk perspective. So this report is going to help us really clearly understand which processes or functions are we at greatest risk with, and how often do we need to review them or audit them or whatever the case may be. So as you're building out audit programs and things like that, this report can be helpful to do that and for scheduling and things of that nature. If I scroll down, the next report is the meat and potatoes. This is the process risk report, or as you more commonly would know it, the risk assessment itself. So this is my enterprise risk management risk assessment. We've got the process on the left-hand side. We've got the column for owner if it's been assigned out. We've got a column for the protection profile, which we've discussed quite a bit already. We also have a column for total threat score. Now, as part of TRAC, we're going to get that from the threat screen. If you ever want to nerd out about TRAC, just let me know. I'm happy to talk about it. But suffice to say, TRAC is going to handle that for you. We multiply those two together, protection profile by total threat score. That's how we're going to give you a numerical value for inherent risk score for every single process you've got here in the tool. So now this is a quantitative process-based risk assessment, which is exactly what the examiners are looking for. We're going to break it down on a process-by-process basis, and we're going to tell you exactly how risky each of them is. It's not the thumbs up, thumbs down, high, medium, low, red, blue, green approach to risk. These are all numerical values that you can use to understand not just which of your processes are riskiest, but by a factor of how much as well. We take the inherent risk score, we start chipping away at it with the controls you currently have in place so that we can give you residual risk and a percent mitigated number as well. TRAC also allows you to set risk mitigation goals too. So from a compliance perspective, hopefully what you're seeing is what we've learned throughout countless thousands of examinations our tool has been through. This will demonstrate compliance. Here's my processor function, here's its inherent and residual risk scores, pretty simple. The percent mitigated is where we start to get into that decision making, right? Where are my strengths? Where are my weaknesses? Where do I need to deploy my limited resources to make sure that I'm getting to my risk mitigation goals? Now, some of these are pretty obvious. I need to come in and add some controls on some of these in my demo account, but you can look at this and say, okay, well, I'm at 26% risk mitigation on my safe deposit boxes. My goal is 55%, so maybe that's an area I need to deploy resources. Again, TRAC is our tool, and what we're hoping you would get out of any risk assessment you're doing is not just the ability to demonstrate compliance, which is critically important, but also how can we use it to help drive better decision making as well. Those are the two kind of twin focuses of what we're trying to accomplish. So that's our risk assessment. I want to take a look at a couple other reports here really quickly. We do have a future risk report. So this will give you inherent risk score, no controls whatsoever. Residual is based off the implemented column as always. So where are we right now? We also have the ability to give you what we call a future risk score too. That would be implemented plus planned, or essentially what will our risk look like down the road if we do X, Y, and Z on top of what we're doing now. So from a planning, budgeting perspective, this allows you to really get a glimpse down the road and see, okay, where will we be at that point? My personal favorite report, excuse me, is our risk mitigation report. We put current and future status right next to one another, but these three columns in the middle are what I think are so critical. Risk mitigated, risk mitigation goal, risk mitigation needed. Now, I'll ask that you ignore the one at the top here again, just for today's demo. I apologize, I meant to delete that. But what those three columns tell you, and anybody you show it to, is this is where we are, this is how much risk we're currently mitigating. This is our goal, it's what we agreed upon, it's where we want to get to. And if we want to get there, this is where we need to put our resources. So now it's black and white, right? It's not I heard about it at a conference, I read about it in a blog, or anything like that. This is your hard data telling you exactly where do you need to put your resources to get to your goals. Now, the last thing I want to point out, and this is a report that you won't see in any other module, because ERM is so global, we actually allow you to pull one additional report here as part of your risk assessment in TRAC. And I would encourage you to think about how you might do this otherwise as well. The first thing we're going to do is look at risk from a threat perspective. So what would our risk look like from an operational risk perspective, reputational, financial, compliance, or strategic risk? So if you're really concerned about reputational risk, you can actually come in here and see, okay, this is where we are from a risk mitigation perspective when it comes to reputational risk. So again, ERM, more global than some of the other risk assessments that are out there. We're going to help you understand how risky each of those kind of threat areas are. Better than that even is what we call our inherent threat source report. So this is going to tell you in each of those areas, operational, reputational, financial, compliance, and strategic, which functions or processes are contributing the most to your risk. So let's say again, you're really concerned about reputational risk. You can come in here and say, okay, well, if I'm really worried about that, I need to look at my retail, my debit credit cards, and that's it. So those would be the two top ones that I would need to look at from a reputational perspective. If we're really concerned about compliance risk, we could look at our ACH processing, our lending, our retail, and then our asset liability management. So again, just a little bit of a different way to look at risk that is specific to ERM because it is, again, more global in nature. So again, the risk assessment process, we walked through that in that ERM module. We got our functions in here. We helped you identify the protection profile so you understand how critical each of them are. We've identified the threats, including the impact and probability of each of them occurring. We've talked about controls, which ones we've got, which ones we might add down the road. And then we are able to run good reports that demonstrate compliance, certainly, but also hopefully help drive better decision making as well. So that is just one of the risk assessments the other risk assessments that are out there, an enterprise risk management risk assessment. All right, so the next one, BSA risk assessment. So what are we doing here? We're looking at a risk assessment of all the categories that make up your Bank Secrecy Act program. Now, I'm not gonna stand here and lecture you guys on what BSA and Bank Secrecy Act is and all that fun stuff. I'm sure you know it better than I do. But what we're here to do is really come in and understand again where our greatest areas of weakness are from a BSA perspective. As you're all well aware, BSA compliance is very serious, and there are significant fines around it if we're not compliant. So we need to understand what we're doing and how we're doing it and what controls we've got in place and all those things. What might we risk assess when we're talking about BSA? We're going to look at what we call categories. Now, I hate that terminology, but it's directly lifted from guidance, so we're kind of stuck with it. But here in TRAC, for instance, we're going to look at things like your customer base. So what does an individual customer look like? Not an actual individual customer, but as an individual customer, what might the BSA risk look like? Non-resident aliens, business entities, both foreign and domestic, any cash-intensive businesses you've got that you bank, any non-bank financial institutions. So one thing, we're going to look at your customer base. We're going to look at your operations and processes. So correspondent accounts, bulk shipments of currency, broker deposit, your SARs, and then finally your products and services. Do we have demand deposit accounts, time deposits, electronic banking, so on and so forth. So those are the sorts of things that we're going to risk assess from a BSA perspective. The workflow is identical. So we're going to buzz through this a little bit more quickly, but you're going to start by looking at your BSA categories, which ones you've got, but also how critical they are. You're going to look at your threats. Pretty simple, right? We're going to understand which ones are out there, how bad they might be, and how likely they are to occur. We'll talk about our controls, and then we'll run reports. So bouncing back into TRAC and moving over to our BSA module, you're going to see that it follows the exact same workflow. Again, I said this earlier, but I'll reiterate it. That's a feature, not a bug. We want to make this as simple as possible. We actually created the IT risk assessment first. Everybody loved it. They said, hey, this is great, but we've got these other risk assessments we need to perform as well. Can you help us with those? And we said, absolutely. We've got the workflow. We just need to come up with the content. So that's what we've done here. Just quickly on the workflow, you'd come in, you'd either add them all at once or as many as you can at once in the quick add, or you can add them individually. If I go inside of any of these, let's just pick electronic banking as an example. You're going to see that same three-step workflow: details, threats, controls. Here, the protection profile is a little bit different. So again, we do tweak it because we want to make sure it's specific to what it is you're looking at. From a protection profile perspective, we look at the reputational risk of the category, the financial risk, the legal regulatory risk, but then we also look at the volume risk as well. So instead of strategic risk in the ERM module, here we look at volume risk, which basically is meant to capture a couple of different things: the quantity of transactions occurring in a particular account type, but also kind of the volume of influence that a particular category might have on your institution. So again, same idea, same concept. The protection profile is there to tell you how critical each of these are, just a little bit different in terms of how we categorize it. We'll look at the threats, so the threats that could potentially occur to each individual category. We look at the impact and the probability of those threats occurring. Same idea, it's all built into this tool, ready for you to use. And then we talk about controls. Same thing here as well. We're going to give you a list of controls you could conceivably have in place. We're going to weight them to tell you how effective they would be if implemented. And then you would tell us what you've got already would be the implemented column. What you're planning on adding down the road, that would be the plan change column. BSA also allows you to run reports in the same way that we talked about in ERM. And if I pop that one up, you're going to see that it looks pretty similar. We've got our protection profile report. So this will look at each individual category. It's going to give you the reputational, financial, legal, regulatory, and volume risk, so you can understand which ones are most critical. We're also going to give you that risk assessment as well. Consistency is a big thing. When I talk to clients and I talk to prospects, one of the things that gets brought up all the time is we want to have a consistent way of performing risk assessments, and it doesn't get any more consistent than everything looking and feeling the exact same way all the way down to reports. So in this report, we're looking at each individual category. We're going to give you that protection profile, the total threat score. We multiply those together to get inherent risk. We use the controls you've got in place to give you residual. And then again, we can give you a % mitigated and a risk mitigation goal as well. So all of that exactly the same as you saw in the report is here as well. And then we do have that risk mitigation report that I like so much. The only one that's missing was that threat source report that we looked at in ERM, because again, that's specific to that module. The rest of the reports are going to be basically identical It's just what it is we're risk assessing that's going to be different. So again, BSA is a risk assessment of categories from a Bank Secrecy Act perspective, and we look at primarily things like your customer base, your operations and your processes, and your products and services. Now, not to sound like a broken record, but compliance is going to be the exact same thing. Our compliance risk assessment is going to follow the exact same workflow. What we're risk assessing here is is all of the regulations that you are meant to comply with from a federal perspective. Why were we doing that? Because again, we need to know where our weaknesses are so that we're not falling out of compliance with a particular regulation. Here, what we might risk assess, any regulation at all, from Reg A to Reg AA to UDAP, all the way down to Reg Z. We've got every regulation, every federal regulation that you could potentially need to comply with, we've got built in the tool ready for you to use. So if I jump back into TRAC again, and we go to that compliance module, it's going to look exactly the same. Only here, we're looking at regulations. So if I go inside of any of these, let's just pick fair lending as an example. 3-step workflow, right? Details, threats, and controls. Details, all the information you've already included. Threats is going to be that customized list of threats that could cause you to fall out of compliance, the impact and the probability of that threat occurring. And then we give you that list of controls as well. You tell us what you've got in place and what you might implement down the road. So again, same exact workflow. And then when it comes to reports, you guessed it, these will be exactly the same as well. So we're going to give you a protection profile report, which will tell you which of them are most critical. So you can make sure that you're focusing your efforts on the ones that are of greatest risk to you. But we also are going to give you that risk assessment as well as the future and risk mitigation reports as well. In addition to all kinds of other reports, by the way, it occurs to me, I'm probably making it sound like these are the only reports you can get out of TRAC. That's absolutely not the case. If I were to go back to our reports tab on any of these, you can see that we've got all kinds of reports that you can pull in both PDF and Excel format. Pretty much every PDF report has a doppelganger in Excel. I just chose to show you some of our heavy hitters to make sure that we were moving as quickly as possible. So again, compliance is going to be a risk assessment of the regulations you're meant to comply with, and it's going to follow the ERM and the BSA module in the exact same workflow. The only difference is what it is we're risk assessing. All right, so now let's talk about something a little bit more exciting, and I'll skip this slide. Let's talk about some of the 2 risk assessments in TRAC that are actually going to be pretty unique in terms of how they operate. The first one is what we call CA TRAC. And what it basically means is a corporate or a commercial account risk assessment. Now, what are we risk assessing here? It's a risk assessment of your commercial or your corporate customers. So if you've got a bunch of commercial customers that you provide services to, this is a risk assessment that you could to use to perform on them. And why are we doing it? Because they're the low-hanging fruit, and it's not always easy to tell where your greatest risks are. And what I mean by that is, let's talk about you, probably anybody on the call that's a financial institution, which I imagine is the bulk of you. It's difficult to get in, to brute force our way into you guys. You have tons of regulation that you're meant to comply with, as we would see in the risk assessment. You do training, and you have technology, and you've got all this different stuff in place to make sure that you're protected. The people that are not doing that are the dry cleaner down the street, or the law office potentially, or even in some cases the hospital. Whatever the case may be, we have these commercial customers that have a ton of access to us because they've got all these services, but they don't necessarily have all of the different pieces in place to protect themselves like we do as a financial services industry. The other thing that the commercial account risk assessment is really helpful for is understanding where your greatest risks are. I always kind of like to use the example of, let's say I'm looking at 2 companies. One is a really large company. We lend them a lot of money. They've got a ton of services from us. They've got a bunch of employees, all that stuff. And then I've got a small mom and pop shop that maybe we don't give much access to, and we don't lend really any money to, or anything like that. If I were to look at both of those, initially I might think to myself, wow, the bigger one is the biggest risk. But what if that larger company does a great job? What if they have a ton of different technology in place, and they do training, and they do a lot of the things that we're already doing? Maybe they do a great job protecting themselves, whereas the mom and pop goes down to the library to do the public library to do all of their banking. We need to be able to understand, where our greatest areas of risk are. And we really can't do that by just, we can't judge a book by its cover, basically, at the end of the day. So what are we going to risk assess here? It doesn't really matter, really, any commercial or corporate customer you might have, big or small. That's what we're looking at. And as we're going through the process, you're going to see this in TRAC in a moment. We're going to begin by getting a list of our commercial customers. We need to understand who they are, what financial information we can provide on them, what services they have access to, stuff like that, what industry, the number of employees, that sort of thing. From there, we're going to actually use customizable online questionnaires that are aimed at getting more information about how effective a job they are doing protecting themselves. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. At the end of the day, our goal is that we get results, right? Reports that help us, as potentially a financial institution, really understand our customers better. But we also want to be able to use that to provide valuable education to them at the exact same time. So it's kind of a nice win-win. If you do it right, doesn't mean you have to put a ton more effort into it. But what it can do is not just give you the information you need, but it can really help you understand and provide additional education to that end user as well. So we have a module in TRAC called TRAC. Kind of speaks to my influence at our company that I've been trying to get them to change the name of this forever. A lot of people look at that and say, oh, that must be the CAT tool. We actually have a version of the CAT, but this is not it. This is, again, a commercial account risk module. The way we're going to operate in here is we're going to come in and we're going to enter the information about our customer. We're going to tell TRAC things like their name and the industry they're in and the demographic information and who at the institution owns that particular account and what the account name, contact name and email is. So we fill in some information over there. We're also going to give an inherent a risk profile. We're going to talk about what their typically monthly online balance looks like, any online credit that we provide. We ask that you score them on a scale of, we start it with 1 to 3. You're welcome to do 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. It's up to you. But basically score them on what you think the financial risk is, the number of employees, and then probably most important is the services that are provided. TRAC will use this information to generate an inherent risk score for this commercial customer. So right off the bat, we're going to use this information in an algorithm so that we can give you, here's the risk score for this particular commercial customer, a numerical value, just like we do in our other risk assessment modules, but geared toward an actual commercial customer. Once we get them in here, it's a matter of running what we call campaigns. Now, TRAC allows you to create campaigns in here. So if I came in and I'm just going to say this is a test campaign, November, test, survey name, we'll say test campaign, and this is a test. And I'm going to save that. TRAC allows you to create you can actually create your own question sets. So if you're interested in coming in here and building out question sets that you might want to use, you're welcome to do that. But we also offer a standard and advanced risk assessment question set as well. The standard set is a 10 question set. The advanced is an additional 10 questions, but these are all based off of the NIST standards for cybersecurity for small businesses. So questions are things like, my organization uses antivirus and anti-spyware software. And the answers are everything from, I'm not aware of what kind of software we use. We don't use any software. We have it on some computers. We have it on all, but it's not updated. Or we update all our software and scan computers daily. So again, all kinds of great questions that are meant to get at how effective a job this particular customer is doing. So you can build out the question sets, whether that's using your stuff or using our stuff is up to you. You can also tell us which accounts you want to include in each individual campaign. And then when you're finished, you would actually send out links to the commercial customers so that they can come in here and actually take that take that questionnaire online on a secure website that we provide. When they've completed it, you can start running reports that would help you understand how each individual customer is doing. So if I came in here and I pull up this test campaign board packet, just as an example, you'll see how many accounts have taken the test so far, or the questionnaire so far. In this case, I've got 1 out of 10. All of them are in a particular risk level. We've got our risk mitigation goal information. This will tell you the inherent risk score, your top 10 most inherently risky accounts. It'll tell you your most residual risky accounts. It'll tell you how short some of these are in terms of getting to your goal. And then one thing I really like, and I think this is really helpful, is this will give you an idea once everybody's taken it, or as people continue to take it, this is going to help you, this remediation piece is going to help you understand what you might want to be offering training on. Because we're going to take all of the answers that have been given, and we're going to tell you, here are the top 3 things that you might want to educate your customers about. So if you do like a monthly newsletter, or you do a town hall or anything like that, you can actually use the information you're getting out of these surveys and come in and say, okay, this is based off the answers we're getting. Antivirus and spyware protection is the biggest thing that we need to talk about, or network internet connection security. That's something. So just kind of another cool way to really get a sense for what it is we need to be thinking about and where our greatest risks lie with our customers. At the same time, we do allow you, or we actually allow the customer to download a white labeled report that would tell them how effective they performed on the survey. So in this case, this demo customer got a 45 out of a possible 100. And it's going to give them a top 10 list of recommendations they can put in place to better protect themselves going forward. So in this case, this was the question. Their answer was that we don't provide any training. So the top recommendation in this case is train your employees when hired and on a regular basis by informed security personnel, and require all employees sign a statement that they understand your organization's security policies. So again, not only are we going to get information for you, because if I go back to TRAC, I can actually go inside of any of my commercial accounts that have taken that survey, and I can understand where they are from a risk perspective based off of the survey responses. But you're also going to be providing some education to them that then they can use to better protect themselves going forward. So just kind of another nice feature, you actually get, as the institution, actually get access to the same report, so you can read it if you want to. But again, the goal of this module is really to help you understand all of your commercial customers and how effective a job they are doing mitigating risk. So we're going to be able to give you an inherent risk score based off the information you provide, and we'll be able to give you a residual risk score based off the information that they provide to you as part of that survey. And then you can use that to start making decisions around how you want to handle each of them. What types of, do we want to, maybe you're rolling out a new service and you want to make sure that you're only giving it to people that are mitigating enough risk. That's one way you could use this. Lots of different things you can do, but at the end of the day, it's really built to help you understand which of your customers are riskiest, not just from an inherent perspective, but also from a residual perspective as well. So that's the commercial account takeover, or a CA TRAC module here in TRAC. All right, so the last of the risk assessments I'm going to talk about here today is what we call our Information Security Program Risk Assessment. Now, some of you may be thinking, okay, that sounds a lot like what the CAT is, and the answer is, yeah, that's basically what the CAT is. Both of those tools, our Information Security Program Assessment and the CAT, are built to help you understand how risky all the different pieces of your information security program are, and basically what your maturity level is. The reason I'm here to talk about TRAC today, and the reason this module in TRAC today, is that we feel like our version is a more complete version. There's less gray area, and we think the reporting is quite a bit better as well. I'm going to talk about some of that as we're moving along. So what are we risk assessing here? This is a qualitative risk assessment of your information security program as a whole. So again, very similar to the CAT. That is different than a lot of the risk assessments we've talked about so far, right? The BSA, the ERM, the compliance risk assessment, those modules that we talked about, those are quantitative risk assessments. It's all formulas and calculations and all kinds of analytics that go into that. Whereas the information security program risk assessment is going to be more of a multiple choice question sort of thing, and we're going to talk about it as we're moving through it. Why do we do it? Because there are other options to the CAT. We talked about this. I did a cyber showcase probably 6 months ago now, where I talked about the CAT and kind of what the future looks like there. I think we're all familiar with the fact that it hasn't been updated terribly often, and there are starting to pop up some other options that you might have. Our information security program risk assessment is a potential replacement there as well. It's also built to help you understand the risk that you might have in different information or different areas of your ISP on a more global level. So what are you going to talk about risk assessing there? I've listed them out here: your organization, responsibilities, strategic planning, your org chart, insurance, Operations, we'll look at our risk assessment and our asset inventory and our network diagram. We look at our audit program. We look at human resource security and physical and environmental security, and all these different things go into what we consider to be our information security program risk assessment. How we perform it is actually, again, pretty much identical to the CAT. The question set is going to be different, the reports are going to be different, but how it works is pretty similar. We're going to start with an inherent risk profile that's going to help us understand what our risk looks like as an organization. So I'll show you that in a moment. We're going to do a risk assessment where we're actually going to talk about the controls we have in place to mitigate the threats that our organization faces. And then we're going to run reports that tell us like an executive summary so we can quickly understand what our risk looks like and our maturity level looks like. TRAC actually in this module provides you a next steps report. So not only will we tell you where your risks are, but we're going to tell you, hey, these are the steps we would recommend you put in place next to make sure that you're getting better. And then the big thing about our ISP module that I like about it the most, and I'm going to show you this too, is we actually perform what amounts to a gap analysis. We're going to give you a color-coded chart that you can really easily use to understand where all the gaps in your program are so that you can attack them in the best way possible. So bouncing back to TRAC, if you go into what we call our organizational risk assessment module, you're going to see two options here. The first option is the CAT itself. This is a free module, the CAT is. So if you're interested in signing up for that and you're not already using it, you're more than welcome to do that. Just let me know. My contact information will be up here at the end. I'll be happy to send you a link to sign up for that. So that's the CAT, and that is a free version of it. The ISP assessment is a licensable version of our information security program risk assessment. So the workflow we're going to follow, we're going to develop an inherent risk profile by coming in here. And again, very similar to a CAT, we're going to talk about things like our technology and connection types. So what is the total number of internet service provider connections that we've got? Do we have any unsecured external connections? What does our wireless network access look like? We'll look at your delivery channels and your online mobile products and technology services, so on and so forth. So we come in here, or you would come in here, and you would answer questions in each of these areas. From there, we move to the risk assessment part. Now, this is where the departure from the CAT is most noticeable, because unlike all those different domains that they've got, we've actually built it out in all these different kind of risk assessment areas. So we'll look at things like your program in general. You know, has an information security program been implemented? And you would say anything from, yep, it has, to partially, to no, excuse me, to not applicable. And then we do allow you to add notes as well. So, you know, what does our operations look like? Are risks to information and information technology systems identified and assessed? Do we use an information technology risk assessment and perform it at least annually? All kinds, we've got questions in each of these different areas. And just like the CAT, you would come in and answer them. That's kind of where the similarities are going to end, because we again feel like the reports that you're going to get out of our version are going to be better. So if I come in here and I pull up our report packet, we're going to start with an executive summary where we're going to tell you, based off of the inherent risk profile categories, what your risk looks like in each of them. So, you know, for me, my greatest area of risk is my delivery channels. I'm a significant risk there. My online mobile products and technology services is a moderate risk, and overall, I'm about a moderate risk level. So again, just a quick snapshot of your inherent risk profile. We're going to look at the topic areas, and we're going to tell you how effective a job you're doing mitigating risk in all of those based off of the answers that you put in the risk assessment section. So program-wise, I'm 100% risk mitigated. I'm doing exactly what I need to do there. Organizationally, I'm at 70%. So I'm okay, but I need to do some work. Operations, I'm in bad shape, and my corporate accounts, I need to do some work as well. So looking at each of those topic areas, we're going to help you understand what your risk looks like there. We're also going to give you a next steps report. Now, I like this because unlike the CAT that basically says, hey, you just need to go back and answer these questions, yes. What our next steps report is going to do is give you a top 10 list of controls that you should put in place next. This is what you should be doing. So for me, the number one thing I need to do is use my risk assessment results to formulate the scope and schedule of my audit. Right now, I'm not doing that. TRAC is telling me that's the biggest thing that I could do to help myself. The next one would be using my information technology risk assessment to identify and prioritize risk exposure. That's something I need to work on. So again, we give you a top 10 list of controls up here, and then actually there's an additional report that we won't look at today that would give you all of the next steps that you might want to consider as well. So kind of a neat way to look at it and say, okay, what do we really need to be concerned about? TRAC's going to automatically spit out that control list for you. Now, my favorite part of the module is right here. This is our ISP risk chart. So as I mentioned, this is basically going to help you conduct a gap analysis on your information security program. So we're going to look at all those areas across the top: organization, operations, audit, so on and so forth. And we're going to color code where your greatest areas of risk are based off of your inherent risk profile and the risk assessment questionnaire that you answered. So for me, my operations is a high risk area, right? My risk assessment is high, my asset inventory is high, my network diagram's in pretty good shape, so I don't have to worry about that too much. But these other things I need to work on. You know, from a human resource security perspective, my hiring's a medium, my employment is a high risk, so I might need to go back and take a look at that, but my training and my acceptable use are low. So again, this is a really excellent report that you can hand to a board member, hand to management, whomever it might be, and say, this is where the gaps in our program are. This is why we're recommending that we put these resources to work in the best possible way by attacking these areas. In fact, when we do any sort of kind of virtual CISO or consulting engagement like that, this is one of the first things that we'll wind up doing, because we really believe this gives a really good understanding of how effective we are in each of these areas and which ones we might want to hit going forward. So in addition to kind of the executive summary and the next steps report and all those great things, we're also going to help you really get a feel for where the gaps are in your program overall. So again, that's our ISP assessment. It's similar to the CAT. They're getting at kind of the same thing, but we believe it's a better questionnaire and better reporting to really help you better understand where you need to work on going forward. All right, so bouncing back to this, and before I answer any questions that might come up, just quickly, we do have all kinds of TRAC modules. If you're not familiar with it, we've got the three that are kind of the main ones: IT risk, business continuity, and vendor management. We've got all the risk assessments we've talked about. We've got an audit module. We've got documentation modules. If you're ever interested in seeing any of those, again, feel free to contact me. I'll have my contact information up here in just a moment. Just some key takeaways. There are many risk assessments that you're probably already performing or might need to be performing. And really, no matter how you do it, hopefully you saw kind of the workflow to get them done, but TRAC can really help with a majority of those that are out there. So if you're doing these manually and you want to find a better way, TRAC can assist with that. Using built-in intelligence and intuitive workflows, our tool is built to help you complete these in days, help you complete what usually takes days or weeks in about hours. We've got great, easy to read, easy to understand reports. And the biggest thing is, look, nobody likes completing risk assessments, but they are important. And we want to make them as simple as possible. Again, nobody grew up, as far as I know, I've never had anybody tell me otherwise, nobody grew up saying, Mom, Dad, I can't wait to grow up and do risk assessments someday, or vendor management or business continuity management. Maybe you are out there, and I apologize if I've offended you, but chances are good it's not. So we need to make this as simple as possible. We need to make something that's pretty complex as easy as possible, and we believe that we've done that here in TRAC. So just hopefully, if you're interested in any of those modules, we'd be happy to talk about them with you. All right, so I'm going to take a look and see if there were any questions, but here is my contact information. If you ever want to reach out to me, feel free to do that. And one question we had pop up is, excuse me, how are the risk assessments that we looked at, the ERM, compliance, and BSA in particular, how are they different than the business continuity management module of TRAC? And it's a great question, and I'm actually going to pull that up really quickly. There's not a whole lot of difference. The workflow that you follow in the business continuity management module of TRAC is going to be basically identical to all the other risk assessments that we have. Again, that's a feature, not a bug. The real big difference when it comes to business continuity is when we're doing the risk assessment there, we're also completing a business impact analysis. So whereas like ERM looks at a protection profile that just has reputational, financial, legal, regulatory, and strategic risk, here in BCM, we look at impacts. So the customer impact, the financial impact, the legal, regulatory, the required recovery resources impact. We also have to include the timeframes and the dependencies. So it is a little bit unique, BCM is, just because we are capturing a little bit more information because at the end of the day, not only do we have to do the risk assessment, but we also have to give you the business impact analysis as well. Great question, though. All right, with that said, that was the only question I saw, so I will leave my contact information up here. If there's anything we can do to help out, any questions we can answer for you, please feel free to reach out to me. Really appreciate your time today. Hopefully this was helpful, and we'd certainly love to see you on TRAC in the near future. So thanks again, and have a great day.